Long ago, in a small village surrounded by green hills and rocky paths, there lived a young man named Daniel. He was the son of a humble shepherd who spent his days caring for sheep and helping anyone in need. Daniel's father often taught him about God's love, mercy, and faithfulness. Every evening, they would sit beside a small fire, and his father would tell stories about miracles, forgiveness, and the promise that God never abandons his children. As Daniel grew older, he became restless. He looked beyond the hills and dreamed of wealth, adventure, and fame. The simple life of a shepherd no longer satisfied him. One day, he told his father, "I want to leave this village. I want to see the world and make a name for myself." His father looked at him with sadness, but also with love. "My son," he said, "the world is not always what it seems. Many roads appear bright at the beginning, but lead into darkness. Remember that God is with you wherever you go." Daniel packed his belongings and left the village. He traveled to a great city filled with merchants, musicians, and travelers from distant lands. At first, life seemed wonderful. He found work, earned money, and made many friends. Every night was filled with laughter and excitement, but Daniel slowly forgot the lessons his father had taught him. He became proud and selfish. He spent his money carelessly and chased after temporary pleasures. The friends who once surrounded him only cared about what he could give them. Months passed and trouble arrived. A severe drought struck the region. Businesses closed, jobs disappeared, and food became scarce. Daniel lost everything he had worked for. The friends he trusted vanished overnight. Hungry and alone, he wandered the streets searching for help. Day after day, he grew weaker. He slept in abandoned buildings and begged for scraps of food. For the first time in his life, he realized how far he had drifted from the values he once cherished. One cold night, while sitting under a broken shelter, Daniel remembered his father's words. God never abandons his children. Tears filled his eyes. "Lord," he whispered, "I have made many mistakes. I thought I could live without you. I thought I knew better. But now I have nothing. If you can still hear me, please show me a way home." The next morning, Daniel decided to return to his village. The journey was long and difficult. He walked for many days with little food and tired feet. Along the way, he helped an elderly traveler who had fallen beside the road. Though Daniel himself was struggling, he shared the small piece of bread he had. The old man smiled and said, "Kindness given in hardship is precious in God's eyes." Daniel continued walking until he finally saw the familiar hills of his childhood. Fear filled his heart. He wondered if his father would reject him. As he approached the village, he noticed someone running toward him. It was his father. The old shepherd wrapped his arms around his son before Daniel could say a word. "Father," Daniel cried, "I do not deserve your love. I have failed you." But his father shook his head. "My son was lost, and now he is found. Nothing brings me greater joy than seeing you return." The village celebrated Daniel's return. Yet something had changed within him. The hardships he endured had taught him humility. He no longer desired wealth or fame. Instead, he wanted to help others. One day, while tending sheep on the hillside, Daniel met a traveler who spoke about a teacher named Jesus. The traveler told stories of miracles, healing, and forgiveness. "He teaches that God loves even the lost," the traveler said. "He welcomes sinners, heals the brokenhearted, and offers hope to everyone." Daniel listened carefully. Every word touched his heart. Months later, Daniel joined a crowd gathered near a dusty road where Jesus was teaching. People from many towns had come to hear him. Some were sick, some were poor, and others simply longed for hope. Jesus spoke with compassion. "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Daniel felt as if those words were meant specifically for him. After the teaching ended, he remained behind. He watched Jesus speaking kindly to children, comforting widows, and blessing the poor. A blind man was brought before Jesus. The crowd fell silent. Jesus gently touched the man's eyes and prayed. Moments later, the blind man opened his eyes and shouted with joy, "I can see!" The The crowd erupted in praise. Daniel stood amazed. Yet the miracle that touched him most was not the healing itself. It was the compassion in Jesus' eyes. Over the following weeks, Daniel followed Jesus from village to village. He witnessed many miracles. He saw the hungry fed, the sick healed, and the hopeless encouraged. One afternoon, a storm arose while Jesus and his disciples crossed a lake. Waves crashed against the boat. Experienced fishermen feared for their lives, but Jesus stood and spoke to the wind. "Peace, be still." Instantly the storm ceased. The waters became calm. The disciples looked at one another in amazement. Daniel realized that Jesus possessed authority unlike anyone he had ever known. Yet not everyone welcomed Jesus. Religious leaders grew jealous. They feared losing their influence and power. Despite opposition, Jesus continued teaching about love, mercy, and forgiveness. Then came the darkest day. Jesus was arrested. False accusations were made against him. Crowds that once praised him now shouted against him. Daniel watched helplessly as Jesus was led away. The teacher who had changed countless lives was sentenced to death. As Jesus carried his cross, many wept. Even then, Jesus prayed for those who hurt him. "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." Daniel could hardly understand such mercy. When Jesus died, darkness covered the land. Hope seemed lost. The disciples hid in fear. Many believed the story had ended, but God was not finished. 3 days later, astonishing news spread throughout Jerusalem. The tomb was empty. Jesus had risen from the dead. At first, many doubted, yet witnesses came forward. They had seen him alive. Soon, Daniel himself joined a gathering where Jesus appeared. The room fell silent. There he stood, alive. The scars remained on his hands, but death had no power over him. Joy filled every heart. Jesus spoke words that Daniel would never forget. "Do not be afraid. I am with you always." In that moment, Daniel understood the greatest truth of all. God's love is stronger than failure, stronger than fear, stronger than death itself. Years later, Daniel became known throughout the region as a man of faith and kindness. Whenever people asked why he spent his life helping others, he would tell them his story. He spoke of a loving father who welcomed him home. He spoke of mistakes forgiven. He spoke of hope restored. And most importantly, he spoke of Jesus, the Savior who seeks the lost, heals the broken, and offers eternal hope to all who believe. And wherever Daniel went, he shared the same message. No matter how far you have wandered, God's love can always bring you home. After witnessing the risen Jesus, Daniel's life was completely transformed. The young man who had once chased wealth and worldly success now desired only one thing: to serve God and share the message of Jesus with the world. Every morning he woke with a sense of purpose, and every night he thanked God for the mercy that had changed his life. The days following Jesus' resurrection were filled with wonder. The disciples gathered often, encouraging one another and remembering everything Jesus had taught them. Daniel joined them whenever he could. They prayed together, sang songs of praise, and shared stories about the miracles they had witnessed. One day, many followers gathered on a hillside outside Jerusalem. The risen Jesus stood before them. The crowd listened carefully as he spoke his final instructions. "Go into all the world and share the good news. Teach people to love God and love one another. Be a light in the darkness." As he finished speaking, Jesus was taken up into heaven. The crowd stood in silence, amazed by what they had seen. Daniel looked toward the sky and felt a deep conviction in his heart. "My life belongs to God now," he whispered. Back in Jerusalem, the believers continued meeting together. They shared meals, prayed constantly, and helped anyone who was in need. Their love for one another became known throughout the city. However, not everyone welcomed their message. Religious leaders feared the growing movement. They worried that more and more people were choosing to follow Jesus. Soon, believers began facing opposition. Some were mocked, others were threatened, a few were arrested. One evening, soldiers entered a gathering where Christians were praying. Several men were taken away in chains. Fear spread through the community. Many wondered whether they should stop speaking about Jesus. Daniel remembered the courage he had seen in Jesus during his final days. Gathering the believers together, he said, "The Lord never promised an easy road, but he promised to walk with us through every trial." His words encouraged many. That night, they prayed for strength rather than safety. The next morning, news arrived that the imprisoned believers had been released. Instead of becoming silent, they became even bolder. The message of Jesus continued spreading. Months later, Daniel felt God calling him to travel beyond Jerusalem. He packed a small bag and began a journey that would last many years. His first destination was a village, suffering from severe drought. The land was dry, crops had failed, families struggled to survive. When Daniel arrived, he found people discouraged and hopeless. He spent his days helping farmers repair broken wells and sharing food whenever possible. At night, villagers gathered around small fires while Daniel told them stories about Jesus. He spoke about the feeding of the 5,000. He spoke about God's compassion. He spoke about hope. Many listened with tears in their eyes. Elderly farmer approached him after a gathering. "I lost everything during the drought," the man said, "but tonight I remembered that God has not forgotten me." Those words encouraged Daniel greatly. As he traveled farther, he encountered people from every walk of life. He met merchants, fishermen, widows, soldiers, children. Some welcomed his message, others laughed at him, yet Daniel remained faithful. One afternoon, he entered a town known for violence and crime. People warned him not to stay there. "Strangers are not safe in this place," they said. But Daniel felt God urging him to remain. During his first night in the town, he met a young thief named Marcus. Marcus had spent years stealing from others. His heart was filled with bitterness. When he heard Daniel speaking about forgiveness, he interrupted angrily. "You don't know what I've done," Marcus said. "No," Daniel replied gently, "but God does." Marcus laughed. "There is no forgiveness for someone like me." Daniel remembered his own mistakes. He looked at the young man and said, "I once believed the same thing, but God's mercy is greater than our failures." The conversation continued long into the night. For the first time in years, Marcus felt hope. Over the following weeks, his life began changing. He stopped stealing. He returned what he could. He started helping the poor. People were astonished. Many asked what had caused such a transformation. Marcus always gave the same answer: "I met Jesus through someone who refused to give up on me." Stories like this became common during Daniel's travels. In one village, he comforted a grieving mother who had lost her son. In another town, he helped settle a bitter conflict between neighbors. Wherever he went, he tried to reflect the love and compassion of Jesus. Years passed. Daniel's reputation as a faithful teacher spread throughout the region, yet life remained challenging. One winter, while crossing a mountain range, a powerful storm appeared unexpectedly. Snow covered the roads. The wind roared through the valleys. Visibility disappeared. Daniel became lost. For hours he wandered through freezing conditions. Eventually, exhausted and weak, he collapsed near a rocky cliff. As darkness fell, he prayed, "Lord, if it is your will, guide me." Moments later, he noticed a faint light in the distance. Using the last of his strength, he followed it. The light came from a small cabin. An elderly couple welcomed him inside. They gave him warm food and a place to sleep. The next morning, the husband shared something remarkable. "We almost extinguished our lantern last night," he said, "but we felt God urging us to keep it burning." Daniel smiled. He knew God had answered his prayer. As the years continued, Daniel witnessed countless examples of God's faithfulness. He saw broken families reunited. He saw enemies become friends. He saw people discover peace after years of suffering. Although miracles did not happen every day, God continually worked in ways that touched hearts and changed lives. One day, while speaking in a crowded marketplace, Daniel noticed a young girl standing quietly in the crowd. Her clothes were worn. She appeared hungry. After the gathering ended, Daniel approached her. "Where is your family?" he asked. The girl explained that she had become separated from them during a journey. For weeks, she had survived alone. Daniel immediately began helping her. He asked local merchants if they recognized her. Days later, her family was found. The reunion was filled with tears and joy. The girl's father embraced Daniel. "You gave us hope when we had none," he said. Daniel replied, "Give thanks to God. He is the one who never stops searching for his children." As he grew older, traveling became more difficult. His hair turned gray. His steps slowed, yet his passion for serving God never faded. Young believers often accompanied him on his journeys. They listened carefully as he shared lessons from his life. One evening around a campfire, a young follower asked him, "After everything you've experienced, what have you learned about faith?" Daniel stared into the flames. Then he answered, "Faith is not trusting God only when life is easy. Faith is trusting Him when you cannot see the road ahead." The group listened silently. Daniel continued, "There were times when I felt afraid, times when I felt weak, times when I wondered what would happen next. But every single time, God proved faithful." Another young man asked, "What is the greatest miracle you've witnessed?" Daniel smiled. Many expected him to mention a healing or an incredible event. Instead, he said, "The greatest miracle is a changed heart." The group looked surprised. Daniel explained, "I have seen proud people become humble. I have seen cruel people become kind. I have seen hopeless people find joy. Nothing is more powerful than God's ability to transform a human life." The years continued passing. Eventually, Daniel returned to the village where his story had begun. The same hills stood in the distance. The same fields stretched across the countryside. Memories flooded his mind. He remembered leaving home as a restless young man. He remembered failure. He remembered forgiveness. Most importantly, he remembered meeting Jesus. Now an old man, he spent his remaining years teaching children and encouraging families. People traveled from distant places to hear his stories. Whenever someone asked him for the secret to a meaningful life, he always gave the same answer: walk with God every day. Near the end of his life, Daniel gathered his children and grandchildren around him. The room was filled with love. They listened carefully as he shared one final message: do not chase the things of this world above everything else. Wealth fades, power fades, fame fades, but God's love remains forever. Tears filled many eyes. Then Daniel smiled. The Lord guided me when I was lost. He strengthened me when I was weak. He forgave me when I failed. Never forget his goodness. That night, as stars filled the sky outside his window, Daniel prayed quietly. Thank you, Lord, for every blessing, every lesson, and every opportunity to serve you. A deep peace settled over him. His journey was complete, yet the message he carried continued spreading through everyone whose life he had touched. And generation after generation, people remembered the words of the lost shepherd's son who found his way home through Jesus. Faith is stronger than fear. Hope is stronger than despair. Love is stronger than hatred. And God's mercy is greater than every mistake we have ever made. Many years passed after Daniel returned to his village. Though his body had grown old, his spirit remained strong. The stories of his journeys had spread across distant lands, and people often traveled for days just to hear him speak about faith, hope, and the love of Jesus. One spring morning, a group of young believers arrived at Daniel's home. They had heard about his life and wanted to learn from him. Teach us how to serve God, one of them asked. Daniel smiled warmly. The best way to serve God is to love people, he replied. Help the weak, encourage the discouraged, forgive those who hurt you, and never stop trusting the Lord. The young men stayed for several weeks, listening to his stories and learning from his wisdom. One evening, Daniel led them to a hill overlooking the village. The sun was setting. Golden light covered the fields. Pointing toward the horizon, Daniel said, "Do you see how far the light travels? That is what faith should do. A single act of kindness can reach farther than you imagine." The young believers remembered those words. Soon they began traveling to nearby villages, helping people and sharing the message of Jesus. As time passed, difficult days returned to the region. Severe famine struck the land. Crops failed. Food became scarce. Families struggled to survive. Fear spread quickly. Many people wondered if God had forgotten them. Daniel gathered the villagers. Together, standing in the center of the town square, he spoke calmly. "Do not allow fear to control your hearts. We must help one another." The villagers listened. Inspired by his leadership, families began sharing what little food they had. Farmers helped neighbors. Merchants lowered their prices. Those with extra supplies gave generously to those in need. Although the famine remained difficult, the village survived because people chose unity instead of selfishness. One day during the famine, a stranger arrived in town. He was tired, hungry, and dressed in worn clothing. Most people ignored him. Some viewed him with suspicion. But Daniel welcomed him warmly. The stranger stayed with Daniel's family for several days. During that time, Daniel learned that the man had lost everything. Bandits had stolen his belongings. His family lived far away. He had nowhere to go. Before leaving, the stranger asked, "Why would you help someone you do not know?" Daniel answered gently, "Because many years ago, God showed mercy to me when I least deserved it." The stranger never forgot those words. Years later, stories would spread about a kind old man whose compassion changed countless lives. As Daniel's influence grew, some local leaders became jealous. They questioned his teachings and criticized his popularity. One leader named Victor often spoke against him. "People listen to Daniel too much," Victor complained. "He has no position of power, yet everyone respects him." Victor decided to confront Daniel publicly. A large crowd gathered in the town square. Victor stepped forward. "If God truly guides you," he asked, "why do good people still suffer?" The crowd became silent. Everyone waited for Daniel's response. The old man thought carefully before speaking. "Suffering is one of life's greatest mysteries," he said. "But I have learned that God does not abandon us during our pain. Often he works through our struggles to shape our character, strengthen our faith, and teach us compassion." Victor remained silent. Daniel continued, "When I was young, I experienced failure and loss. At the time, I saw only darkness. But looking back, I can see that God was leading me toward something greater." The crowd nodded. Even Victor seemed thoughtful. Months later, Victor's own family faced hardship. His youngest son became seriously ill. Doctors could do little to help. Desperate and afraid, Victor visited Daniel. For the first time, pride disappeared from his voice. "Please pray for my son," he said. Daniel immediately agreed. For several weeks, he visited the family regularly. He prayed with them, encouraged them, supported them. Gradually, the boy recovered. Victor was deeply moved. The experience changed his heart. From that day forward, he became one of Daniel's closest friends. Daniel often reminded people that enemies could become friends when love replaced bitterness. The years continued passing. Children who once listened to Daniel's stories became adults. Adults became grandparents. Entire generations grew up hearing about his faith. One summer, Daniel organized a gathering unlike anything the village had seen before. Families came from distant regions. Hundreds gathered in open fields. Music filled the air. People shared meals and celebrated God's goodness. When Daniel stood to speak, the crowd became quiet. Looking across the faces before him, he felt overwhelming gratitude. Many of these people had experienced transformation through God's love. Some had overcome addiction. Some had survived tragedy. Some had discovered faith after years of doubt. Each story reflected God's faithfulness. Daniel spoke for hours. He shared lessons from his life. He spoke about forgiveness. He spoke about courage. He spoke about humility. But above all, he spoke about Jesus. "Everything good in my life began when I stopped running from God," he said. The crowd listened carefully. "Jesus changed my heart. And if he can change me, he can change anyone." Many people wept. Others prayed quietly. For countless individuals, that gathering became a turning point in their lives. As old age advanced, Daniel spent more time writing down his experiences. He wanted future generations to learn from both his successes and mistakes. Night after night, by candlelight, he recorded stories from his journeys. He described moments of fear, moments of faith, moments when God's guidance became clear. His writings spread beyond the village. Travelers carried copies to distant towns. Teachers shared them with students. Families read them, together around evening fires. Years later, many people would say that Daniel's words strengthened their faith during difficult seasons. One cold winter evening, Daniel sat beside a fireplace with his grandchildren. Outside, snow covered the fields. The children gathered close. "Grandfather," one asked, "what should we remember when life becomes difficult?" Daniel looked at each child carefully. Then he answered, "Remember that storms never last forever." The children listened. "When you feel afraid, pray. When you feel weak, trust God. When you make mistakes, seek forgiveness. And when you experience blessings, share them with others." The children smiled. Those simple lessons stayed with them for the rest of their lives. As Daniel approached the final chapter of his earthly journey, he felt peace rather than fear. He had witnessed God's faithfulness for many decades. He had seen lives transformed. He had seen hope restored. Most importantly, he had learned that God's love never fails. One evening, surrounded by family and friends, Daniel spoke his final public message. His voice was softer now, but every word carried wisdom. "The world will continue changing," he said. "Empires rise and fall. Wealth comes and goes. But the truth of God's love remains forever." The crowd listened quietly. Daniel smiled. "Keep your faith strong. Love one another. Help those in need. And never forget that Jesus is the light that shines even in the darkest night." Those words became his legacy. Long after Daniel's earthly life ended, people continued sharing his story. Children told it to their children. Families repeated his lessons. Travelers carried his message across distant lands, and generation after generation remembered the shepherd's son who once wandered far from home, discovered the grace of Jesus, and spent the rest of his life helping others find their way to God.